Hello, I'm Sheriff Jack Strain. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Badge. This month's show is the beginning of a two-part series focusing on child abuse. Child abuse knows no boundaries. It's not limited to race, religion, or social standing. Did you know an average of 5 children die every day nationally as a result of child abuse or neglect? 32% of those victims are under the age of 4. From January to June of 2012, over 100,000 children reported being sexually abused. Today, you will meet some of the people fighting to end child abuse here in St. Tammany Parish. These individuals work tirelessly to find the offenders of these crimes, build cases against them, and finally prosecute and send them to jail. This process involves many people working together for one cause: to protect our children.
Well, it starts with someone contacting child welfare, making a report of possible abuse or neglect. That could be from a neighbor, a relative. Sometimes it's the child themselves making the report. It's also from mandated reporters such as school personnel, the medical field.
As a doctor, someone bringing their child to the doctor and there is a suspicion of any type of abuse, physical or sexual abuse, the doctor is a mandatory reporter, so they will then either report that to the Office of Children and Family Services, or they can report it to law enforcement as well.
The majority of our reports that come in for either physical or sexual abuse, the children almost always knows this person. They may even love this person. It may be a relative, a friend, someone that's just been close to the family. It's a rare occasion that we have a stranger, accusations against a stranger. Not that we never have that, but in the majority of times it's someone the child knows, loves, or trusts, or spends a lot of time with.
We would normally try to get an interview set up through the Hope House for a forensic interview to be done with the child to find out exactly when, where, and who, and what happened to the child.
Hope House is a house. It's a home. It's where a child can go and feel comfortable. It's not the police setting where you got wanted posters all over the wall and bars where people are put behind and individuals handcuffed to stools. It is a place where a child can feel comfortable. It feels like home, and they make sure of that. So when the families bring their loved ones to the facility, it's like bringing them to a neighbor's house. It's got the little white picket fence out front. It's got the toys for the kids. It's got the teddy bears. They can play and feel comfortable and relax and share their story with our investigators. A great facility.
This is the Children's Advocacy Center for children who are sexually abused. And so our primary cases are sexual abuse cases. And you remember that sexual abuse comes in many forms. I mean, you can have a child who is physically, sexually abused. You can have a child who has witnessed sexual abuse. You can have, and there are different definitions of sexual abuse, where it's the actual sex act, it's fondling, it's insinuating, it's children who are forced to view, and so the list goes on and on and on. And our forensic interview is an expert in this field in the discussion of sexual abuse. But the majority of our children are sexual abuse victims.
When they arrive, they're met by a victim advocate who will talk with the family, make sure they understand what's going to happen today. And then whenever it's time for the interview, I will come out and introduce myself to the parents and to the child. The investigators will be in a separate room where they can watch the interview. The child and I will come back to this interview room. And if it's an older child, we'll sit in these two nice, comfortable chairs. And if it's a younger child, we'll pull a table out and have colors and color and talk about things that make the child feel comfortable talking to me, because I'm a complete stranger to them. And then the interview itself, I use non-leading questions. I'll start out with asking about their family and things they like to do to understand how they communicate. And from there, we'll go and talk about safety issues, and they can tell me what the concerns are about their safety or someone else's safety. And our main rule in this room is that we just talk about the truth, things that really happen.
When we go to the Hope House to do our interviews, those interviews are recorded, and the investigator that is assigned to the case at the time that the interview is being done, they sit in a separate room and they have the opportunity to listen to the interview. We are also in contact with the forensic interviewer who is conducting the interview in case there's some things that they may need to know as the interview progresses, or if there's certain things that we need to get out of the interview. When the forensic interviewer is doing the interview, they do not ask specific questions. They ask very open-ended questions as part of the procedure for a forensic interview when you're interviewing child victims. So it gives us the ability to bring these victims to a place that is very child-friendly. They're not sitting in a police station. They're not sitting before policemen who are doing these interviews, which can oftentimes be intimidating to children, especially when they're talking about something such as a physical abuse or sexual abuse. Normally, it's one of the worst things that's ever happened to them as children.
Often when the child is talking, a lot of times children, when they come in, they're real soft-spoken, so I will repeat what they say to make sure I have it right, and so that the investigators can understand what the child said, and also so if I have it wrong, the child can correct me. That's one of the rules, that the child corrects me, and he's teaching me about what's going on in his life.
It's a very interesting procedure, and then after the interview has been completed, typically the forensic interviewer will check with our worker and with law enforcement to see if there are any additional questions or any clarification before they conclude. It's such a it's just such a positive environment, and our agency has worked so well with Hope House, and Hope House has worked so well with us that we have a very good working relationship. We participate after the interview has been completed, usually within a couple of weeks. Every month we have a MDT, multiple disciplinary team meeting with the interviewer, with law enforcement, with the district attorney's office, our agency, and we go over that interview. And we discuss where we are in our investigation. Law enforcement discusses where they are in the criminal aspect, because our roles are very separate. Child protection, we're here to provide, to make sure that children are safe, to help families remain as a family, if possible, and to provide services. We're a helping agency, whereas law enforcement's role is to determine whether a crime occurred. So we work together, but it's very separate roles. And the CAC brings us all together, and all our roles come to play a very important part in being sure that children and our community are safe and protected.
I've been doing this for 25 years, and the statistics show us that 1 out of every 4 of our girls, 1 out of every 6 of our boys are going to be sexually abused by the time they're 18 years old. And that type of crime does an enormous amount of damage. These kids feel they're not only damaged by the abuse, but they feel shame and guilt and humiliation every day because they feel like they did something wrong because they haven't had the courage to tell somebody. And that fear goes on until we can successfully try their case. So for 25 years, almost 400 jury trials, I've been trying to do as many of these cases as I can because I know how important they are. You know, I've been around since before there was a children's advocacy center. And so the reason that these cases were so tough is because jurors have an expectation of hard evidence in really challenging cases. They have an expectation that we'll have DNA, that we'll have fingerprints, that we'll have ballistics, and that we'll have an airtight confession. And also that our eyewitnesses will be mature and analytical thinkers who can be trusted. And in a child abuse case, usually what I have is a 6 or 7-year-old little girl who has troubles at home and who has a hard time in school because of what's happened to her. So when you come at it with that proposition, you realize how unbelievably hard these cases are for a prosecutor, even one who specializes in it and even one who's been doing it for that long.
Having done this job for almost 30 years and having worked side by side with Scott for probably 20 of those 30 years, he's a phenomenal prosecutor, well prepared, soft-spoken, well respected in the law enforcement community, and I always take great pride and great pleasure whenever I can work a case with Scott. His conviction rate is probably far above anyone else in the agency. Not that their other prosecutors are incompetent by any means, but Scott is just a great guy. You can see the passion in his eyes when he handles a case. And much like our juvenile detectives, he doesn't work the case, he lives them as well.
With the Children's Advocacy Center, kids are interviewed by a professional forensic interviewer who's been trained in how to get these kids to open up, who's been trained in how to let them tell what happened to them without leading them. And it's done in an environment that allows kids to relax to the extent that they can. So when I go to court, instead of a child having to do all the heavy lifting, having to come into court and talk about extremely embarrassing details of their lives in front of a group of 12 strangers, plus cops, plus the person that did it to them, we can rely to a certain extent on that interview. And that makes our job so much, I don't want to say easier, because it's never easy to win these cases, but it makes it so much more palatable.
This is the room that we store all of our client material. We have every case that we have ever video recorded is in this room. Our first interview was done in 1995, and we have close to 4,000 interviews contained in this room. And every one of these interviews is of a child that came to our facility due to an allegation of child abuse.
Part of Children's Hospital is the Audrey Hepburn Care Center. The Audrey Hepburn Care Center is actually the Children's Advocacy Center for New Orleans. They not only do physical examinations at the Audrey Hepburn Care Center, but they also do forensic interviews at the Audrey Hepburn Care Center. So after a child is seen in the emergency room and the emergency services are offered at Children's Hospital, it's common within 2 weeks, within a period of about 2 weeks, that the children are referred to go to the Audrey Hepburn Care Center. While they're there, they will do a forensic examination with a doctor at Children's Hospital.
The big thing that we always want to make sure that the families and whoever's referring the children to understand is it's not a painful, it's not an intrusive exam, that this is truly a no-ouch visit. And so because we wouldn't in any way want to re-traumatize these children who have already been victims of a severe crime.
The doctor will do an interview with them, and then that interview is later transcribed and sent to whichever investigator is working the case.
In most cases, the protocol, as the protocol is in St. Tammany, the actual child will basically go to their local Children's Advocacy Center and have a full forensic interview by a trained forensic interviewer. Typically, they are then referred after that for their medical. The medical providers, who are specially trained in forensic interviewing skills to make sure that they're not asking any type of leading or suggestive question. They're only asking non-leading and non-suggestive questions, but they're asking what's called a medical incident history. So they need to understand what touched what, so that they know then what to swab and what to look for and what to possibly photograph. So it is a little bit of asking the child about what occurred, but it's part of a medical incident history. And there's sharing of information between the two centers. So we try as best we can to coordinate so that we don't have to get additional information. But we also know from the research that a lot of children will tell the medical provider a little bit more because like the general public, they actually believe that the doctors can tell by looking. The doctors and nurse practitioners can tell by looking at their bodies. So sometimes the medical providers might get a little more information, which of course will help with the case when it comes to holding offenders accountable for prosecution in criminal court or even for their protection in child protection hearings.
They're just as beneficial as the Children's Advocacy Center. They're experts in their field of child sexual abuse, also of any neglect also, and physical abuse. We send our sexually abused victims, we send our children who have had severe neglect. We also send those children there, and also our physically abused children, they see them also for a forensic medical exam. They are able to, determine things with their experience that maybe a local doctor without that kind of experience would recognize, whether it be neglect, abuse, or sexual abuse.
Our system sometimes is unfair. Take, for example, an adult, a lady who's been the victim of a rape. She's going through that trauma, and now she sometimes often is victimized again by the judicial system, where she now has to stand before the accused, stand in a courtroom where it's full of people, strangers, and relive that event, often sometimes even more traumatic than the initial incident in itself. Now we're talking about kids. That's the great thing about the CAC. They're the voice of the children of our community. They conduct these interviews, they secure these tapes. These tapes are provided to the prosecutors, and often when shown to defense attorneys, many of the cases never make it to trial. They see the power of this child communicating with a professional, reliving the events that traumatize their lives. And because of the CAC's work and their efforts, our conviction rates are astronomical, and rightfully so.
Well, sometimes during our jury trials, by the time it actually goes to court, you have, for example, maybe a grown man on stand testifying about the abuse that happened. And it's hard for a jury to wrap their heads around that this grown man was abused by this perpetrator, who at this time may be, smaller in size, but once they see the video and they see that person as a child telling their story, it makes it more real for them, and they're able to really understand the impact the abuse had on this person.
The number of interviews that we do here at the CAC will be from about 18 up to maybe 32. There have been months that I've done 35 interviews. So it just, you can never tell how many are coming in. On average, on a yearly basis, we will do about 250 to 280 interviews a year.
Since we've had the Advocacy Center statements, interviews available to us, a professional to testify as to the interview, I've gone back and looked over some of the notes that I keep, and I can only recall one case in the last decade and a half that involved Advocacy Center statements, which resulted in an outright acquittal. And that's remarkable considering the enormous number of these types of cases that I handle. So that statistic speaks for itself. When you're winning and successfully prosecuting cases to verdict, that many cases, I think that that tells you what you need to know about how much we value the CAC. I've got to give you a full disclosure. I'm a board member. I raise money for the operation. I'm a big fan, but the reason is because I see what they do.
I've been in law enforcement. I've been with the Sheriff's Office almost 14 years, and I've done nothing but juvenile crimes, primarily sex crimes. Our unit investigates primarily sex crimes and serious physical abuse. I've been doing that for almost 8 years now. You have to get to a point, and you have to be the kind of investigator that can separate themselves from your personal feelings and know that you have a job to do. It can affect people. It can affect investigators. It has affected investigators in the past. There are people that can't handle doing this type of work. They can't handle being in a juvenile division that deals with sex crimes and physical abuse. You just have to be honest with yourself, and you have to know that you have a job to do, and this is your job. And the result of what you're going to do in this investigation has a direct impact on the family. If you're a person who can't handle doing these types of investigations, then there's a possibility that you may miss something, overlook something, or go to the extreme and get an investigation, take a look at it, hear a victim say something, and want to rush right out and put somebody in jail off of your emotions. And it's tough sometimes to as an investigator to want to slow down and make sure that the case is correct, as opposed to running out there and doing something off of your emotions alone.
When people do this for a long period of time, particularly law enforcement and prosecutors, the rule is that you're going to burn out, you know. And many of my friends that started as long ago as I did are now in a private practice, or they're doing criminal defense because they simply saw too many of these cases, lost too many of them, saw the damage that was done. And about 20 years ago, I started keeping a burnout prevention board in my office. And so every time somebody comes in, I ask them if they'll draw a picture for me. And I make a commitment that it will always be up there when they come back, so that when they come back the second time or the third time to visit before they go to court, they can always look up and see a picture that they drew, and they know that their case means a lot to me. And the last one I still have up on the board. And if you can't get inspired to come to work, when you have, "Thank you, Mr. Scott, love, Sophia," and there's Sophia and me sitting around our table talking about our case, this certainly prevents burnout.
The other aspect of our work is our prevention and awareness campaign called Darkness to Light. We actually have a goal in the next 5 years to train 10,000 adults in St. Tammany and Washington parishes in our Stewards of Children program, which is an educational program that teaches adults how to look for the signs of abuse, how to appropriately respond if a child discloses abuse, and how to actually prevent abuse in our community, in our churches, in our daycare centers, and in our schools. It's been shown that every one adult trained in Stewards of Children can reasonably protect up to 10 children from the devastation of child abuse. So we are out in the community with this outreach and education program, ensuring that as adults, we're taking the full responsibility to protect our children and to make our community a safer place.
We're kind of a secret sometimes, and people don't know about the Children's Advocacy Center. They confuse us every now and then with some of the other nonprofit entities throughout the community. We are for the children and their families in the community. Anyone can report anonymously. You can call the Sheriff's Office and let them know that you have an allegation of sexual abuse. It can be, you can be a neighbor and you can anonymously report to the Department of Children and Family Services. I mean, you have many means to be a watchdog for the children of the community. And really, that's everybody's obligation, you know, to make sure that children are safe and feel good in their homes and not be subject to sexual abuse. So it's everybody's responsibility to do this. But when it does happen, and unfortunately it does, here we have a safe house for them to come into and talk to someone about it and get some additional counseling. It's a wonderful service in the community. We need support, we need money, we need volunteers, and I hope that through this interview that we'll get some additional folks who will take a look at that website.
The CAC is the voice of our children. They're the voice of our abused children. And because of that voice, they're such an instrumental part in our criminal justice system. It protects kids from being abused over and over again.
For the year of 2011, children's advocacy centers around the country served 279,000 children. By June of 2012, the number nationally was already over 145,000 victims. It is the responsibility of every adult to protect our children. If you know of or suspect a child is being abused, call your local law enforcement agency. Our next show will feature children who have been taken out of dangerous environments and placed into foster care or even adoption. We hope you'll join us. A special thanks to all of those who help bring you this show and to all who fight to protect our children daily. Thanks for watching, and until next time, as always, stay safe.
The St. Tammany Parish Sheriffs Office is committed to upholding the public's trust and protecting life and property within our community. We will utilize sound judgment, reason, and creativity to solve the problems we face, using proactive planning and responsive problem solving. We recognize the badge of our office as a symbol of public faith, and we accept it as a public trust.